You're listening to the Farmyard Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Farmyard. It's a movement, have you heard? And our Patreon supporters. All About Water, with host Linda Borghi and guest Evan Folds.
Well, hello there. It is Linda Borghi, and this is the Farmyard Podcast. How are you today? Oh gosh, I am sitting here looking out the window, and I just I could taste spring. It's in the back of my mouth. I could taste it. It's right there. Yes, okay, it is just the middle of February, and I am in Silver Spring, Maryland, and it is gray and drizzling outside, but things are starting to swell, and, spring brings new life, and each and every one of you are just one seed away. Just one seed away. Well, you're one seed away if you're lucky enough to be connected with this podcast right now, because Farmyard, we have some special partners on our team, very special partners. One partner on our team I have not seen on any other team in the country, honest to goodness. And that is a soil doctor. Have you seen any soil doctors lately? Do you have a soil emergency? Do you even know if you have a soil emergency? Well, it takes a few steps in farming a yard and growing food. And one is soil, the other is sun, and the other is water. Without those three elements, we can't really grow anything. Actually, we don't grow anything. We just help things to grow, but we couldn't even help it to grow because there'd be nothing to work with. And what I would like to do is bring on and re-announce the Evan Folds is Farmyard's soil doctor, and he has gone all the way around the circle and has decided to land right back on our platform once again. How lucky are we? Evan, I know you're there. Here he is. And you are going to talk about water today, aren't you?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite subjects.
Is it? Well, it is my absolute favorite subject. But I don't want to take the floor any longer. So let us have it, Dr. Folds.
Oh, well, water is, I suppose it's probably the simplest and at the same time most misunderstood substance on Earth. It's what we use to define life as we know it here and on other planets, for that matter, or the potential for life. It seems like there's I pay attention to where I have a Facebook page that I try to post on, and cutting edge things that come out, and it does seem that science is paying attention to water in a fresh way, which is very encouraging. But for the conversation, I kind of see two categories, and I'll let you kind of lead the way in regards to how we tread on them. But it's really the source and the application of water, and then kind of the science of water. And I think both are relevant to really understand to grow a great garden, which is the goal of our efforts here. So where do you want to go first?
Well, I would like to go with the application and the source.
Yeah. Okay. Well, obviously, anybody that's endeavored a garden understands they need water. The plants don't lie, right? They tell you as much if you don't. There's some interesting concepts like dry farming that are worth poking around on, that have some level of popularity, that really restrict water to vegetable plants. But that's not a means of feeding people, let's say. So water, as you identified, you have the soil, you have the sun, you have the water. That's about as simple as you can make it. And the water source turns out to be pretty crucial. I live in Wilmington, North Carolina, and we're at the end of the Cape Fear River. I think the stats say it's the sixth most polluted river in the United States. We're at the end of thousands and thousands of hog farms, more pigs than people in North Carolina. And there's a tremendous issue with not only animal waste, but this Gen X issue that's popped up, and it's even hit the mainstream news. And it's a Teflon plant that spits this really dangerous chemical into the water that bypasses filtration systems. And it's been very interesting for me locally, being so connected to water and aware of water for so long, to see people wake up to the fact that water is not just wet, right? It's the universal solvent. And there's so many things that are picked up by water and made invisible that we tend to take it for granted. So the source of the water is vital in regards to the peace of mind and the result that you can get in your garden. I mean, to keep it simple, and the typical municipal water system, you've got chlorine or chloramines, depending on what your town or company that manages your water system uses. You've got fluoride compounds that are used in an attempt to prevent dental decay. You have, and then you have everything that's not captured by the filtration systems of being used, and all of those things are parlayed into the garden if you're not aware of it. So one obvious way around that is to filter it, which can be quite an issue for someone using a large volume of water. There are some pretty good inline water filtration systems that you can get. But people might have heard of it before. But using rainwater is probably the most ideal source, given that it comes from the sky, and people have concerns about it being acid rain and all these things. Well, the bottom line is it's nowhere near as adulterated as city water or public water, let's say. And so if you can't access rainwater, it's pretty simple. With a rain barrel, you can make one. There's no rocket science there. You can find some plans for that online very easily. And then the third category is well water. And, sometimes the well water can be ideal. Other times it can be really, really bad because it's not managed in any way. It's just a direct source of water from the ecosystem. And if your aquifer or what you're pulling off of is contaminated through agriculture or from brownfields or in some way that you're not aware of, it can be somewhat of a crapshoot. So, I guess the good thing about city water is that it's consistently bad. It's not really bad enough to kill you directly. Who knows, over time, the accumulation of these things, how that works. And I don't mean to scare people, more to inform them. But it's really important to look into and at least call your water system and jump through that hoop if you're going to use city water, or take some measures to bypass it if you can.
Now, also, just even with city water, is it helpful to have let's say you would fill up big 55-gallon drums, plastic drums, and leave it there at least to let it leach the chlorine out of it before you would use it on your garden? Is that helpful?
Yeah, that is good practice if, in fact, you have chlorine in your water. Chloramines is a different story. Chlorine, it off gases, which, typically if you let your water sit out for 24 hours, then, there's a measurable decrease in the amount of chlorine in the water. That is true. Cities and water systems are starting. My water system has started to use chloramines about 5 years ago. And the reason that city water systems or public water systems do that is because it doesn't off gas, and they tend to view it as more cost effective. They don't have to add as much because there's nothing being lost. So chemically, chloramines do not off gas. They need to be filtered if you wanted to remove them. So, that's one thing that you can learn by calling your water system, is just asking that question, and then you can kind of understand what your options are to get around that sort of thing. If you do have chlorine and you want to speed the process up, you can also aerate the water, like what you would do to make compost tea, or in an aquarium where you have an air pump moving, even if it's just the end of a tube, and disturbing the surface of the water. The surface tension of water tends to restrict its ability to lose things or gain things, for that matter. So, breaking the surface of the water with an aerator will speed that process up. But it really depends on whether that chlorine is chloramine or whether it's the chlorine typically used.
And then also, the work of Dr. Emoto. I mean, we could just send intention to the water as well to benefit the plants, because that was proved. What was that? What was that type of photography called that Dr. Emoto used? Are you aware of it, Evan?
I'm well aware of Emoto's work. I don't know the name for his photography. I think it was just a microscopic photography where he was, using microscopy to get down to the structure of ice crystals is what primarily he was doing. But yeah, Emoto was really a gateway for me and for a lot of people into the qualitative aspects of water. I remember What the Bleep Do They Know, I think is the name of the documentary. And that's where I was introduced to it. And there's a little segment, you can find it on YouTube. They talk through the properties of water and how human intention can change it. And it blew my mind, because it really does speak to in my view, the real purpose of water is kind of a medium in which subtle energies are transferred. We tend to think of it as a hydration material, and of course it is. But its ability to retain and kind of distribute, communicate subtle energies within and between living systems is really the magic of water. I use the analogy of, like, in space, if we're up there talking without technology, hypothetically, we can't hear each other because there's no atmosphere for the sound waves to travel through. On Earth, it's kind of, water is kind of the atmosphere for subtle energies. When you straighten a river, we tend to think materialistically and physically about what happens in terms of the erosion and things like that. But the reason the river meanders is to regenerate itself and through implosion, and it's that motion of water being imploded on itself that really activates the water and allows it to retain these subtle energies. So yeah, for people that hear, you can speak to your water and have an influence on it, that may sound crazy, but Dr. Emoto is a good avenue to move down in regards to seeing the literal nature of that. It's pretty amazing.
And so beneficial to the plants that would be watered by this water. It's fascinating. It's also fascinating. So let's talk about application.
Yeah, well, as a lot of the application comes down to, simply put, how you get the water to the garden. Anytime you can automate that, the better. And once you're armed with kind of the science and potential behind water, how you do that may change, and that's an important point. But the bottom line is, most people water their garden through a hose, and they do, or through a watering can, and as they know, can be quite laborious. If you enjoy it, go for it. If you've got a big enough garden, that can become quite a chore. So drip irrigation is always an option. These things accomplished through rainwater capture mechanisms can be a step more than most people have taken in their garden, but I guarantee you, setting up something like that can be automated is a real help in the garden, especially with any kind of scale. So what aspect of application would you like to cover?
Well, I think you covered them. You covered the different types of application, drip irrigation being the last. And actually, I used a gravity-fed drip irrigation system in the late 80s, by building tables out of pallet wood. And these little tables were 3 feet off the ground, and then having plastic food grade 55-gallon drums, initially filled, with the hose if the rain didn't come, but that would water out 100 feet.
Yeah.
It's really incredible. But, even just gathering of water, we're not connected to that anymore. I mean, we feel like things such as water is an unlimited resource, and it's not. It is so limited. Well, you and I both, having connections in Africa, we know darn well that there's an awful lot of people that will never even see a clean drinking water supply in their lifetime.
It's true. Yeah, the majority of people on Earth.
And after all, here we are in our country using 40% of the drinking water to water our lawns. I mean, there's such a high level of stupidity in that it makes me nauseous on a daily basis. It really does. But that's what we're all about. That's what we're here to, to help to turn this train wreck around, because it really is, in fact, a train wreck. Now, we are going to go on, with Evan, and have a series of podcasts about, where do you go from the beginning to the end when you're looking to farm your yard. But keeping in line with the topic of water, Evan, it's very true that when you start to grow soil, rich humus, that type of growing condition would require probably close to 50% less water than, let's say, hard pan or, a sandy loam. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. It's a really good segue from application into kind of the structural capacity or activation capacity of water. And, quality soil does retain so much more moisture. If you're do a soil test, and where I live, we have 1% to 2% organic matter, and measurably. If you don't have 4%, well, then you have to irrigate, regardless of your rain. You have to fertilize. You have to do a lot of things, because the soil's capacity to hold on to it, and in this conversation, the capacity of it to be a sponge is limited. So as you increase the organic matter, and clay will also retain some moisture. It's not as accessible. You mitigate the need to irrigate quite as much, for sure. And I'd also add to that, as a segue, the structure of water. We found, a former company of mine manufactured compost tea brewers, and they used implosion or recirculation to condition the water and make it more available to plant cells and to human cells too. There's a protein channel in cells called the aquaporin. Actually, it was given the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. I think it was 2001, 2003. Dr. Peter Agree, and he discovered these protein channels. And the gist of it is that they need to receive the water in a certain structure, and they drank water molecules one molecule at a time. So in a very simple way of putting it, because you can quickly get very complicated in water, I think there are over 90 parameters of or measurable capacities of water that can be manipulated. So it's an endlessly to the complicated subject, to the extent that even the best scientists in the world don't have a handle on it yet, and we probably never will. But an easy way to think about that aquaporin engagement is the surface tension. Most people are familiar with the surface tension of water. You have the water striders and the meniscus in a glass. So the hydrogen bonding that basically is a result of the polarity of water. You have the hydrogen end, positive end, and the oxygen negative end. Well, having that natural polarity makes water attract itself very easily. And if the surface tension of water is too strong, then water tends to cluster in these microclusters that, just intellectually, visually speaking, hold the water tighter and don't allow a cell to access it. So one of the results of imploding water and of magnetizing water and of treating water in a qualitative way is you can break down the surface tension and make the water wetter, and you make it more conducive to cellular hydration, which is really, if you think about it, the point. You want to deliver nutrition and oxygen into the cell. Water does that. And you want to remove parasites and toxins, which water does as well. So in that respect, you have this ability to influence the water and make it more able to deliver and remove. And it's actually a measurable thing on a commercial level. A lot of these, especially indoor farmers that understand the amount of water that they need to use on a weekly basis, can see, 30, 40, sometimes 50% less water being used in their applications. So it's not only the amount of the ability of the application to retain the moisture and then deliver it, because it can also be overdone, right? I mean, that's why perlite is in potting soil, to allow the drainage. So you don't want to, roots need to breathe also. But if you can manage that capacity, it increases it, and also if you can manage the capacity of the structure of the water, to put kind of a human face on it, because this is always a way that makes sense for people. We're told to drink half our weight in ounces a day to not be dehydrated as a human. And that actually turns out to be quite a bit of water if you do the math. And so, people that do that can still be actually, measurably dehydrated because the water is just irrigating their kidneys. It's not hydrating their cells. So if you condition your water to be more capable of being accessed by life, by cells, you can really flip the script on that, and not only increase your health, but increase the health of your garden, and as you said, reduce the amount of water that you would need to use.
I love the term, water is wetter.
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome? But it's the truth. That's the truth. Well, gosh, I thank you, Evan. Boy, a lot to think about in this episode. And we'll be hearing an awful lot more from you going forward. By the time we're done this season, I believe you're going to have all the components put together for anyone to be successful in their gardening endeavors. Evan is putting together a package currently, and we're going to hear an awful lot more about that in the episodes to come.
Very good. Well, I really appreciate you having me. And we've got a website that's being developed. But for the time being, if you want to seek us out on Facebook at Be Agriculture, BE Agriculture, you can send me an email, and I'm happy to help you how I can. And thank you, Linda, for having me on.
What's your email address, Evan?
It's evan@beagriculture.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you, sweetheart. Once again, I really appreciate your time.
Of course. Great to be here.
Well, thank you, everyone, for listening. I want to thank all our Patreon supporters. Without you, how would we publish this podcast on a weekly basis? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please subscribe, download, comment, and share. That would be awesome if you could do that. Well, that's all for now, Brown Cow. I will see you on the flip side. And until then, go farm your yard.
This podcast is community supported. We thank everyone for tuning in, and a special thank you goes out to all our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe and share. You can help support us through Farm Yard, all one word, on patreon.com.